All right, so I'm making another update for my book collector app, and I messed up on a few things. One, I forgot to keep the updates constant. So I think the last thing I was stuck on was adding a book modal, and I was able to figure it out with some help of the video. But basically, this is code that I'll explain later. Basically, I'm able to add a book. So if I say CS Lewis, and then let's say the screw tape. I think that's how you spell it. Letters. Not sure how many pages it is. We'll just say 308, and we submit it. We get our book. And I first want to explain this. So I'll just start pretty early on. Okay. So I'll just start all the way from the beginning on how I did the add book modal. So when I click add book modal inside of our app.js, and there's a lot of notes in here, so I'm going to go ahead and hide them so I can explain this better. Inside of our app.js, we get a pop-up. And the reason why we get this pop-up is because it's connected to our welcome container, I believe. So this .modal btn is connected to welcome container, which I believe is this. Let's see what happens when we inspect. Yep, our welcome container. So basically all this is going to do is this is going to go here to where all of our add event listeners are, and it's going to the one that's called, let's see, modal pop-up, form, modal close button, edit modal. So which one's opening our modal? So the one that's opening our modal is the handle modal, this document click, which is going to go to handle modal btn click. And then this is going to say is modal btn clicked. And then if it contains the event target. So, and then we're going to is outer body clicked. Let's see. If is modal's btn is clicked. So if this is clicked, then we go ahead and open our modal. But I think there's a better way to explain it. So let me take a step back. So this document body add event listener is connected to a click. So if we console.log hello, and we do that, we get hello. So every time we click on the document body, we basically run a function. So this handle modal btn click is one of those functions that we handle in the body click. So is this another note? Let me make sure it is. Yep, it's another note. So basically the handle modal btn is activated when we click on the body. And one thing that I want to also point out is that we make sure that the add event listener runs when the app opens by making an instance property inside of our constructor function up here. So basically this is going to take that, and then it's going to go down here to handle modal btn click. And what it's asking for is the modal btn click? So basically this is saying this .modal btn contains the event target. So the way we can do that, or the way we can kind of see this, is go up here into what is exactly our modal btn. So our modal btn is right here. And as we see, it's contained, can't even find the words. It's containing our welcome container, which is this welcome container that's just sitting on my screen right here. So that basically just means when we go down here and we go into the handle modal btn click, it's basically saying if the modal btn or if the welcome container contains an event target. So if it does, then this is true. And if it doesn't, that means this statement is false. So what we can also do here is console.log is modal btn clicked. And now we're going to console.log this. So this is false, false, and then we click here, it's going to be true. So the code that runs when this is true is modal btn clicked. So this is basically going to say this .open modal popup. So this is a function that's inside of our class app. So every time we reference, oh man, I just hit my mic. Every time we reference a function inside of our class constructor, we have to use the this property. So we basically say, where did I go? I just lost myself. Okay, so we basically said if isModal btn is clicked. So we're basically saying if we click on it, as we just showed with the console.log, then we want to run the this.openModal popup, which is a function. And this function is connected to this function right here, or method. And what this is going to do is it's going to say this modal popup style display is going to be block. So if we go over here and see what modal popup is attached to in our constructor, we see that modal popup is connected to the add book modal. And in our HTML, our add book modal is basically the modal that we get when we click on the add book. So by default in our CSS, our add book modal is going to say display none. Add book modal position absolute should say display none. Okay, where did it go? Okay, here it is. This should be at the top. That doesn't, I don't know, that's hard to read. It should just be the first thing. So when we go here and we add our book, this is display none. But this function is basically saying, if we go back to the function, it's basically making it display block. And the same with the form buttons. So if we see what the form buttons are connected to, they're connected to the form buttons, which if we go over here, it's connected to the form buttons, the class of form buttons with the submit and the close button. So that's basically going to do that. And that code executes if the statement, there's so much code on here, if the statement isModal btn click is true. Else, we're going to say close modal popup. And the close modal popup is basically going to take that modal popup and it's going to put it back to display none. So I think that is attached to the close button. So I guess anything else would just close it. So if we go here, I can also show this by saying console.log, or we actually already showed that. So another thing I added, which was just a weird thing to my code, is I had to make a isModal popup clicked. And the reason why was because every time I clicked into my modal and clicked inside of the modal, it actually just removed the modal. And two things that I had to do actually, I had to make the isModal popup click. So I had to make the event.target of the modal popup. So if we console.log this real quick, we can see that this is false, false. And then when we click in here, this is true. So we basically had to say, if this is true, isModal popup clicked, then we basically wanted to run a function or method that keeps my modal open. So keep modal open is going to say this modal popup style display, and it's going to keep it at block, because for some reason when I clicked on this, it would just close the modal completely. So that's kind of like some weird zombie code, and it worked, and I kind of understand how it worked, but at the same time I feel like there's probably a better way to do it, but that's just the way I had to do it. So moving on from that, we basically say, where did I go? We basically said const author. Okay, we'll come back to that. So the next thing we wanted to do in our app is when we click the submit button, we want things to submit. And we attach this to our, not body, this modal. We attached it to our this.form.addEventListener. So the reason why we call it this.form is because if we go up here, we see that it's actually connected to our query selector of form. And in our HTML here, this is connected to our, let's see, where's form? Should be here. Form buttons. Okay, where's our form? Form. So this over here. Although I don't even know where my other form is at. Okay, here it is. I don't know why these two aren't connecting with the prettier, but as we can see, these both have an ID of form, or this has an ID of form. So what we're basically saying is that these three inputs that are in here, author, book title, and number of pages, and our submit button and our close button, this is a form. So we're grabbing that form in our constructor, and then we can do whatever we want with it. And we're adding our add event listener for submit. So the submit, we're waiting for the submit, which is this submit button right here. So one thing to realize is that if you have two buttons in an input and you do the add event listener of submit, it will basically use both of these buttons as a submit button. So even the close button is a submit button. And the way around that, I'll explain it in a second. But basically, we're going to run an event, and then we use prevent default. And what prevent default is basically doing is there's a weird error that we were trying to fix where I think it was something like prevent default is basically just saying when I click the submit button, don't reload the page. So if we take this off real quick, just to show you guys what happens, we'll notice when we hit the submit button, it reloads the entire page. So if we do a test, it'll just take everything off the page because it's just reloading the entire thing every single time. So when we get the submit button, we want to basically get the author. So the this.author, this.book title, and this.number of pages. So these are the three input values. So as we can see, if we take the author, book title, number of pages, and we see what it's connected to, we basically see that it's connected to the ID of author, ID of book title, ID of number of pages. And inside of our HTML, these are the names of the forms. So number of pages, book title, and author. So once we go back over here, we can basically scroll down and we're basically seeing that all we're doing is saying this author value. So any value passed through here, like lorem, is basically going to be grabbed and is going to be put into a variable called author, right? And then the same thing goes with the book title. So if it's lorem, the value of the book title is going to be lorem. And the number of pages, if we say 999, we basically see that the number of pages, the value of the number of pages will equal 999. And this code right here called has book is going to make sure that the author, the book title, and the number of pages are all true. And if all three of these are true, then has book is true. But if book title is false, okay, oh, it just created it. If book title is false, then this statement isn't true. And what will happen here is even if you click submit, it won't actually work. And we want to make sure that our users are putting in all of the values. And if has book is true, so if the user enters all three of these values, we are going to run the function. And I just hit my mic again. This is going to sound really terrible, but it's fine. I just have to explain this so I can move on. Oh, buddy. Okay. So if all those are actually true, we are going to run the function this.addBook. And what we're seeing here is that the argument for this function is actually an object. And the object is going to include the author, the book title, and the number of pages. So what's weird is that since the add book is a object, what we'll see here is if we go to the object of add book, if we can find it. Okay, where is it? That's weird. I feel like I passed it like 3 times. Okay, right here. So if we go to the add book, we're noticing that we're basically taking all of these objects in the parameter. So all 3 of the values of this object from the add event listener when we click submit, so has book, it's basically taking the author the book title, and the number of pages, and it's passing it through the arguments of add book. And then what we're also going to do here is say this modal pop-up style display none. So once we click the submit button, it's going to display nothing. So Magician's Nephew 301. So basically, this still doesn't answer the question of why are these things actually populating onto our screen. And the way we can better answer this is by explaining what the add book function is actually doing. So if we go to add book, why is this called edit note? That's not correct. Okay, that's funny. So if we go to add book, we see that it's basically making an object, and this object is going to have key value pairs. And the reason why you see this one having the corresponding book title and this one not having the corresponding author title is because this is the shorthand object property method. And I kind of wanted to point that out so I can kind of reference that in the future. But these two things are the same thing. So if I just change this to book title like that, it'll still work. But we'll just leave it like that just for reference. But we see we're getting the author, and we're grabbing the author through the parameter or through the argument that's being now passed through the parameter of the add book. So we're getting the author, book title, and number of pages, and we're storing them into an object called new book. So basically we're getting the author, the book title, and the number of pages, and we have a color. So the color we haven't gotten to yet, but the default color of our app or of our notes, we want it to be white. And if we change this default color, it'll actually change the color of the note. And I don't want to do that right now, but I just want to point out that that will happen. What we will also see is that we get an ID. So this code looks weird, but all this is saying is that this ID is 1 and this ID is 2. And I'll better explain that in a second. But it's basically saying this.books, so the array of books that we created up here, in which all of our books will be added, we're basically getting the length. And if it's greater than 0, we're going to take that array and we're going to say this.books, and we're going to basically, this is just array, I forgot what it's called, array cloning. And it's basically going to say, we're going to take our this.books array and we're going to clone it. And we're going to say this.books.length is going to be -1. So I think since arrays are 0 counted, it's basically going to say, take the ID and add 1. So I think this is basically just saying, since arrays start count from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, instead it's going to start count from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this code is really hard to explain. And quite frankly, he didn't really explain it really well in the Scrimba video. So I know what it does, but I just don't really fully understand it. Maybe I'll have to play around with it more. So basically moving down, house is loud, can't control that. We're basically saying this dot books is going to equals to an array, right? So it's going to, our original array of this dot books is going to equals to a new array with the old array spreaded into it. And this is really important because if we don't spread the elements from the old array into the new one, then each one of them is just going to be its own array. And we actually don't want that to happen. And in the second argument, we get new book. So we see that the new book is being added to the end of the this.books. So we console log this out, and I want to do it from the beginning. Test, test, test. We basically see what's happening here. So we have three books over here. The first book is Lorem, so it has an ID of 1, even though the array is 0 count. So we see the array 0 count, but the ID is 1. This ID is 2, and this ID is 3. So we see it's Lorem, number of pages. All of these values are being passed into this new array, or this modified array. So if we didn't spread this out, then we would not get an array of objects. Instead, we would get something weird. I think we would get like just an array, and then each element is going to be its own array. and that would just be a mess. So we need to make sure we spread the array into the objects, or we spread the arrays that we are cloning into a new array, and the new book is being added to the end of it. So every time we add a new book, it's adding a new book. And of course, the ID, this code right here, is basically just saying start the ID count from 1, 2, 3 instead of 0, 1, 2, 3, the way arrays usually count. So now thinking about that, that might actually be wrong because the ID isn't corresponding with how the array is counting. But either way, it just means let's just count 1, 2, 3 instead of 0, 1, 2, 3. So what we notice now is that we're running a function called display books. And this is where the magic happens. So if we go down to display books, we're seeing that we're asking if we have any books. So basically it's saying if this .books length is greater than 0, and we'll refresh this, we want to take this placeholder. So this is actually a placeholder right here, and it says books you add appear here. And if we go up here all the way to the top and we go to placeholder, it's basically connected to the ID of placeholder. And if we go to our HTML, we see that our placeholder has an ID of placeholder. So this div right here saying books you add appear here is basically going to be, this dot placeholder is basically going to be removed if we have a book. So I'll explain. So we're basically saying this placeholder style display is going to equal to has books. And how is has books true? If there's any books in our actual array. So if that's true, then the style.display is going to be set to none, meaning that this will disappear and our books will be added. And if not, it's going to be set to block. So what happens if we set this to block? We're going to see that it's not going to remove it, and it's going to mess up our code. Yep, not mess up our code, but mess up our application. So now we see that it's not actually removing. So another thing we're doing here is that we are going to iterate. So this is cool because this is kind of like a for loop, and this is similar to the for loop that I actually created in my to-do list app. And I kind of want to pull it up here because it's really interesting because I want to rebuild this app. And to do that, okay, I think I can just go to my website real quick and then go to my to-do list and then kind of just look at how the code's working here. And I kind of want to compare this because this is really cool. So what we're seeing here is that when we render each chore, it's basically saying let our list items, we're doing this with list items, so it's a little bit different, but we're basically saying ULEL inner HTML is going to equal to list items, and then our books inner HTML is going to equal to our iterated books. So list items is here. We're basically going to, let me explain this better. I know there's a better explanation. So our to do. So we render to do. So this render, and then we pass in the array of to do. This is a little bit different here. So we're just rendering directly into our books. So if we see what this is attached to here, this is attached to our ID of books. And in our HTML, this is connected to, I wish there's a books. So the books is basically the books that are being added in. So if we go to our HTML here and we go to books, I think we can go to books here. Yep. We basically see that it's basically a display flex wrap, justify content, and padding. So it's basically the container containing all of our books themselves. So this is a book. And if we inspect this real quick, we'll see that this is inside of the container of ID of books. So everything that is being added into books is being iterated over. And where is it being iterated over from? It's actually being iterated over from the this.books array. So we already explained how we put items into that array, But now we're basically saying that we're going to map over these things. So we have notes on the map method, and I can pull them up right here real quick. Let me hide this. It's kind of bougie. So we have notes on the map method, so we can just explain what it does. If I can find it. Oh my gosh. Okay. So Notion is just not messing with us today. Okay. So we go into our JS deep dive, and then we go to our range sets, and then we go into our flexible arrays, turn array objects into flexible arrays. No, that's not what we want to do. Build flexible collection, perform action on all elements, transform arrays. It's called the power of map. I think it's the power of reduce. So okay, so reduce is just the accumulator, but dot map method. We're basically just going to see what the dot map method here is doing. So it's already open here. So we're using the dot map method to multiply all of the elements of the number array by 2 and store them into a new array. So we'll see the implementation of it. And this code is basically going to say double numbers map. So it's taking the numbers and it's basically saying, this doesn't even show the original numbers array. Okay, I need to go back. No worries, this is just for me, so I don't need to really, it doesn't need to be perfect. Reduce. It should be here. Turn objects into flexible arrays. We don't need that. Unique sets of data. Oh, this is the set. This is how to use a set. New immutable array features. So that's all the things we use. Filter, reduce, sum, every, for each. Subsets of arrays. Transform arrays with reduce. Understand the power of reduce. Avoid mutations with array spread. Dude, that's cool. There's so many things I can like build into this. Like with these array methods, I really need to play around with these and like add more features into this app when I'm done with it. Okay, so I'm not gonna find it here, am I? Whoa, what the heck? JS deep dive. Arrays and sets, classes? No, it's not classes. No, it's objects and maps. No, it's not objects either that we're trying to work with. It's arrays. Really, everything in JavaScript is like learning how to work with arrays. I feel like if you learn how to work with arrays really well, you know a lot of JavaScript. It's crazy how like you eventually just catch on, like eventually. It's just really weird, and sometimes you need rest. So I just need it's not check existence. Actions on all elements. That's what the map method is. I just remembered. So basically we are map method convert each temperature to each. So basically temperature, maybe I should just explain it manually because this all has prerequisites here. Basically what the map method is doing is that it's iterating over all of our elements. So it's basically, let's say if we have an array, and it's basically going to iterate over every single element in that array. And since it's a callback function, it's going to be called with book. And every time it iterates over an item in that array, it's going to run this code right here. So we're basically saying div, we're creating a div background color of book, and then we give it a data ID. We'll explain that later. But we're basically creating these 3 divs. So book author, title, number of pages, and then these buttons. So every single element that we create is basically running this map method. And this map method, as we can see, all of these buttons are always added to our map method. So our done, edit, and delete button are always added. Our our book author and book title and number of pages is always added. And we're basically getting these values here. So if we see, we're always getting the book color from book.color. And that is coming from our add book function. So we're basically saying add book. So we're basically saying our book.color. So if we change the color to purple and we add something here, we'll notice that we get purple. And that's because they are connected. So the background color of this div is going to be the book.color. So going up here, it's going to be the book.color right here. It's grabbing it from that element right there. And then our data ID, explain that later. So basically our book author is going to take the book.author. Same thing. It's taking the book.author from up here, which is passed through our constructor, that's funny, through our parameter here, which is given to us through the value of our inputs. So the values that we're passing through the inputs. So author. So this dot value author, pass through author. We're basically getting it all kind of linearly. I feel like hopefully I'm explaining that all right. But the same thing is for our book.title. We're grabbing it from this function over here of book.title, and then we're grabbing it from where we run the function. It just realized from where we actually run the function. So actually not even there, which is funny. From here. So remember when I was talking about the value, the book title, and the number of pages, and then the has books, and then we're basically running this object as an argument and passing it through our add book function. That's where it's getting all of those values from. So same thing with the number of pages. And then every time we load something up, we're loading it up with our ID or with our buttons included, right? So that's why it's appearing. And it's appearing inside of our books because that's the container containing all of our books. And now every instance of that book, if we go ahead and do that, we see that it's just, can I grab the whole thing? Okay, it's just these 3 divs, right? It's just these 3 divs that I created, and it's just this class of book. So every single time the class of books is getting added to this div of books that I specified earlier. So I feel like I have a much better explanation, but I'm just going to have to do with that one for now. So that's kind of a shorthand explanation on how we added everything. We're still recording. So we can just do that. So that's a shorthand method of how we're adding everything. But now there's something new in my app, and it's when I click on one, it lets us modify. So that's really cool, and I'm really excited to explain that. Edited, but I don't even know. And when we click close, it edits. So that's something that I really want to explain, and I'm really excited to explain. So how did we do that? So first of all, there's a new modal that we added, and that's the edit book modal. So the edit book modal appears when we click on the actual book, and we're going to explain that too. But basically, this edit book modal, we can go to it in our CSS. Where's the edit book modal? I think it's all the way down here. Our edit book modal is right here. So we're saying our position's absolute. It's opening with that. I would like to make it darker, honestly. I feel like it'd look nicer darker. Nah. I'll just play around with this. I actually like it white too. I think it looks really cool. Honestly, real quick, not even gonna lie to you, edit book modal. I might modify this real quick because I actually think this looks good. So I just want this to go down. So edit book modal, close btn. We can say margin top. Let's say 1 M. I actually kind of like that. We're gonna roll with this for a second because I actually like that a lot better. Even though it's kind of weird, it is kind of weird because, I'm sorry. I'm over here doing more random stuff. I shouldn't even be talking about this right now. This is very random. We're gonna just do light green for now. We're gonna do dark gray. We're just gonna do 84, 84, 84. Okay, whatever. I'll make adjustments to that later. But what we're basically able to see is that this edit book modal is actually just the modal that we have up there. So we actually want to put this, of course, inside of our constructor because we want to be able to use this. So this is called our edit book modal. And then this is the class right here of edit book modal content. No, edit book modal. So that is that. What we also notice here, I really need to explain this, is that it has a class of edit book modal content, edit book modal, but it's going to toggle a class, and the toggle class is going to be the open modal. So by default, you cannot see it. So of course, when we loaded up our app, it did not load up, and that's because by default it's hidden. So it has the opacity of 0. It has the transition. This is transition for when it opens. And basically when we open it, we are actually going to run the opacity of 1, meaning it should be visible, visibility of visible. And then these are just the load up animations and just the scaling, meaning just how big it is. So what we notice is that we grabbed our edit book modal. Another thing we grabbed was our inputs. So our edit book modal title, edit book modal number of pages. We grabbed all of these right here. Number of pages. So these are just our input values right here. Right. And then we grabbed our close button as well. So this is the close button. It's just a span, which I don't know why we use a span, but we use a span. Okay. And so basically, how do we even get this to open? So like, how? Yeah, how do we even get this to open? And it's actually quite simple. So basically, did I explain this? Close BTN? Hopefully I did. Basically, this modal close BTN, oh, I didn't explain this. The modal close BTN is basically going to say this dot close modal pop-up. So we're going to close this modal pop-up when we click the close BTN, and we're going to clear these input values. So when we close it and open it, even if these input values are put in, when we close and open, it'll be gone. But one thing to notice is that when we don't, okay, it still closes it, it's still gone. Okay, that's good. So these are just reference to close modal pop-up over here. So basically modal pop-up, display none, and then the clear input values. Basically you're going to say the values of all these inputs are going to be an empty string, so they're going to be cleared. I don't know how I forgot to explain over that, but okay, nice. Oh my gosh, I forgot to explain what happens. So if we say test, 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 and we click out, it'll actually create it. So the reason why this is happening is because we say if has book. So if these three values are entered and the outer bodies click. So this is another piece of zombie code. Oh man, I should have explained this. So the outer body is clicked. I did that because I was having another weird bug. So I wrapped our main inside of another main, and this is the outer body. So, oh man, I really wish I would explain that earlier. But yeah, the outer body is just another main wrapped in a main. This is really, really bad, but that's just how it worked. It just worked. And I know why it worked because it's just weird. So this modal was having a lot of issues with just closing and clearing out values when it wasn't supposed to. And I noticed that when I changed it to be that way and made an outer body and then the inner body, it just works. So it's basically saying when we click the outer body, so we can console.log is outer body clicked just to explain. So what we notice is that the outer body is true, but the outer body is just the main wrapped in another main. And for some reason, it just fixed the issue that I was having. And he didn't even go over that. That's just something that I had to do myself because I did a very, very different project than the one that was shown in the video. I did a lot of things differently, and that's a good thing, I think. So basically, if that's true and the outer body is clicked, these things are going to be passed to the function of add book. So we already know how this works. And then same thing is modal pop-up click. So when it's clicked, it stays open. So we can close that now. Let's add some books. Ah, shoot. Okay, that's funny. There's a lot of weird bugs with this app, which is just so, yeah, there's a lot of weird apps. So I didn't even explain the stop propagation. So when we use the modal close button, we're closing the modal pop-up and clearing the input values. And the stop propagation is basically stopping it from running into the other add event listeners that are inside of this add event listeners. So if we don't do stop propagation, there's going to be some weird issues because it's basically running into the form submit. So stop propagation is going to stop that from happening. Okay, I think I'm good now. I think I explained the rest of the app. Okay, so open edit modal. So that's what we want to explain now. So we're going to do the open edit modal, but how do we even get to open edit modal, you may ask? That is a very good question, and we will find the answer. So if we go to our document body and we add an event listener and then click, we're basically going to say open edit modal is an event. So how do we know what this event is going to do? We go to the event itself. And it's basically asking if the event.target is closest to book. So remember, these are the books. These are a class of books. Every single book is a class of books. And we can see that here, that every time we create a book with the map method, it's going to have a class of book. So we're basically going to say this.edit book modal classless, and we're going to toggle open modal. So remember, the edit book modal is this modal that's right here. It's this modal that's right here. This is the edit book modal. And we're going to toggle the class of open modal. So remember, by default, it's invisible, but now it's visible when we do open modal. So it's just toggling that. So it's just going to toggle it. And so far, we can't close it. With this code, it will not close, but it will close eventually. We also want to say this dot edit book modal author or dot val author. Oh man. So we're also saying this dot edit book modal author. So the edit book modal author is the name of the input value, if you remember that. So edit book modal author or edit modal author. So if we go to edit book modal author and we go up here, it's just going to be the edit modal author. So it's this input form right here. And this input form, we're going to get the value of it. And we're going to put it inside of a const called author. So we turn this into an instance property. If we go up here, we can see that. We turn it into a this.author instance property, and it's going to be an empty string. And the reason why we use this as instance properties is so that we could reference these things wherever we wanted to. And we also did it with the ID, which we did the data set, and I will explain that later. I should have been making the videos on time, and I would have been able to see that. So basically it's going to say, take these values, and the value of these is going to be put into this.author, this.book title, and this.number of pages. So that's how we open the modal, right? Or open the edit modal. And now to close the edit modal, we are saying this.edit note. And edit note is a new function. So basically our open edit modal, we're getting the values of the input forms. And now the edit note, or the note will be edited when we close it. So basically what the close edit modal is going to do is it's going to be attached to this close button right here. And I can show this better by seeing that the edit book modal close BTN has an add event listener of close edit modal. and the edit modal close btn is going to be connected to this, which is this button right here. So if we go down, let me make sure I'm recording. I am still recording. Very long video. We're basically going to see that it's connected to edit note. So by default, we haven't edited our note yet. So if we say edited, edited, and edited, that doesn't make our note edited. And that's where the edit note is going to come in. So this close button is basically just going to toggle the open modal class right here. So remember, by default, it's invisible, but with this open modal toggle, it's visible. It's just toggling it. So it's basically just going to turn it off if it's on and on if it's off. So edit note is basically going to take the author. So it's going to say const author, and it's going to say edit book modal author. It's going to take the value of all of these input forms. So edited, edited, and it's basically going to say this dot books. So the array of this dot books is going to equal to this dot books. And now we're going to map over all of the arrays, all of the elements inside of the array. And it's basically going to say the book ID. So we got the book ID with the data, or the data ID here. If I can go there real quick, the data set ID. So we have a data ID, and the data ID is going to equals to the book ID. And now that means we can use this data ID how we want. And if we go up here, we also made it an instance property of this .id. So when we go back to where we were, this is a lot of spaghetti code. And I should have explained it in the right direction. We're going to iterate over the this.books array. And we're going to say if the book.id is equals to the this.id, so the this.id is the instance property here, and then which is connected to the book ID here, the data ID here, which is basically grabbing the book ID from here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if that's equal to that one, oops, where did I go? So if that's equals to that one, we're going to run this if it's true. And what we're saying is that we're going to create a new object, and we're going to pass in the book. So we're going to pass in all the information from the original array because we need to do that. And we're going to add the author, the book title, and the number of pages. So we're basically taking the elements from that array. So if we clicked on test right here, this is going to have the ID of 1. So this is going to be the book ID of 1, which is going to be equals to the this ID of 1 because we explained it, or we put it here in our data ID of book ID, and then we attached it to our this.id instance property. So these are going to be equals in this case. So it's basically going to be 1 to 1. And since this is true, we're going to take the book. So we're going to take that exact element because we're mapping over all of them. And then we're going to add in our author, our book title, and our number of pages. And if we don't do anything to these values, we're basically just going to return the book that we are supposed to get. And then now we display the books. So when we go to see what display books is, it's this code right here. So we're basically redoing this code, or rerunning that display books code. So when we click close, we will see that it is edited. And that is basically why it happens. So same thing. So this is going to be ID 1, 2, 3, 4. So this already knows it. So this opens the ID of 4. And it's basically saying if the book ID of 4 equals to the this ID of 4, we are going to take the element of book, and we're going to populate it with a new author, book title, and number of pages. So let's say Heller, I don't even know. We'll see that Heller is updated. And something else to note, if we just open one of them, or let's just say, let's open we, and we just close it, we're basically just returning book. But basically what's going to happen is that we're going to run the function display books after we run edit note. And that is what's happening in this app. That was a very long explanation, but I feel like I needed it. And I feel like it cleared up a lot of misconceptions about this app. So I'm going to stream me remaking the to-do list app with the same code from our Google Keep clone. And it's going to be really amazing. It's going to be really cool. But that's pretty much it for this video. Good stuff, good update. And that is it. See you later.